The girl wasn't crying. That was the first thing Terrence noticed. Most kids her age, he guessed 7, maybe 8, would have been sobbing if they'd been separated from their parent in a place like this. The Meridian Tower lobby was not a warm place. It was 32 floors of glass and steel in downtown Calgary, the kind of building where the air itself seemed to cost something. The marble floors were polished to a mirror shine. The security desk was staffed by 2 men in suits that probably cost more than Terrence's truck, and somewhere in the middle of all of it, a small girl in a pale green cardigan stood completely still, watching the revolving door like she was waiting for someone who wasn't coming back. Terrence Boyle shifted the weight of his tool bag on his shoulder and kept walking. He had a service call on the 14th floor. A compressor on the HVAC system that had been throwing fault codes for 3 days. The facilities manager had called him at 6 in the morning, which meant it was urgent, which meant someone important was complaining about the temperature. That was always how it worked in buildings like this. Nobody noticed the systems until they stopped. He was almost past her when she turned and looked directly at him. He stopped. He didn't know why, exactly. There was something in the way she looked at him, not with fear, not with the frantic searching of a lost child, but with a kind of quiet recognition, like she had been looking for something specific and had just found it. "Are you okay?" he asked. She didn't answer right away. She looked at him for a long moment, the way children sometimes do when they're deciding something important. "I'm waiting," she said finally. "For who?" "My mom. She had a meeting." She said it matter-of-factly, the way adults talk about meetings, and Terrence felt an odd pull of amusement beneath the concern. She said 10 minutes. But it's been longer. Terrence glanced at the security desk. The 2 men were occupied, one on a phone call, the other typing with a focused expression. Neither was watching the lobby the way someone should watch a lobby with an unaccompanied child in it. "Does anyone here know you're waiting?" he asked. The girl shook her head. "They don't really look at me." He set his tool bag down, not because he'd decided to stay exactly, but because standing there holding it felt wrong. "What's your name?" "Charlotte," she said. Then, after a small pause, "My mom calls me Lottie, but Charlotte is my proper name." "I'm Terrence," he said. "I'm here to fix the heating on the 14th floor." Charlotte considered this. "Is it broken?" "Part of it. The compressor. Is that hard to fix?" "Not if you know what you're doing." She nodded, as though this were a satisfying answer. Then she took one small step closer to him, not dramatic, not sudden, and tilted her head slightly upward. "You smell like my dad," she said. He didn't know what to say to that. He stood very still. "He smelled like metal," she said quietly, almost to herself. "And something else, like soap but not fancy soap. Just soap." Terrence looked down at her. He thought of his own daughter, Maisie, but no, Maisie was in the list of names he carried in his chest, the ones that made breathing complicated when he said them out loud. He thought of her anyway. She would have been 9 this year. "My dad died," Charlotte said. She wasn't looking at him anymore. She was looking at the revolving door again. 2 years ago. My mom doesn't like to talk about it." "I'm sorry," Terrence said. And he meant it the way you mean it when you know exactly what that kind of loss feels like from the inside, not just from the outside looking in. Charlotte didn't respond to the apology. Kids rarely do. They accept it or they don't, and either way, the conversation moves on. "You can go fix the heating," she said. "I'll be okay." "I know you will," he said, "but I think I'll stay until someone comes." She looked up at him again. Something in her expression shifted, just slightly, barely visible, and she moved one more small step closer without seeming to notice she'd done it. He was still standing there 12 minutes later when the elevator doors opened and Vivienne Ashworth walked out. Terrence recognized the type before he recognized her specifically. There was a way certain people moved through spaces like this lobby, not hurried, exactly, but with a certainty that suggested the space existed for them, rather than the other way around. She was tall, dressed in a charcoal blazer and trousers that were clearly tailored, her dark hair pulled back with the kind of effortless precision that actually takes considerable effort. She was on her phone, speaking in a low, clipped tone, and she was scanning the lobby even as she talked. She found Charlotte in less than 3 seconds. The relief was visible. Just briefly, just in the small loosening around her eyes. And then she ended the call and crossed the marble floor with the kind of purposeful stride that Terrence associated with people who never walked anywhere without a destination. She crouched in front of Charlotte. "I told you to stay by the desk," she said. Her voice was quiet but very precise. "I did at first," Charlotte said, "but then I moved over here." Vivienne Ashworth looked up. She had been aware of Terrence in the peripheral way people are aware of furniture, acknowledging his presence without really seeing him, but now she was looking at him directly, and her expression rearranged itself into something more careful. "Who is this?" she asked Charlotte. "Terrence," Charlotte said. "He's fixing the heating on 14. Vivienne stood. She was nearly Terrence's height in her heels. She looked at him with an expression he had seen before, not quite hostility, but something adjacent to it. A kind of held-breath suspicion. "You were speaking with my daughter?" "She was alone in the lobby," Terrence said. "I stopped to make sure she was all right. She was fine. The security team was aware she was here." Terrence glanced at the security desk. Neither of the two men had moved. Neither was looking at them. He didn't say anything about that. "Of course," he said. "I'll head up to 14 then." He picked up his tool bag. "Wait." Vivienne's voice was sharp enough to stop him. "I'd like to know how you came to be speaking with her. You said you're a technician?" "HVAC contractor. I have a work order. I can show you." He reached into his shirt pocket and produced the folded paper, offering it. She didn't take it. She looked at it, then at him. "The facilities team should have escorted you directly to the service floor," she said. "You shouldn't have been in the main lobby." The escort called ahead. "I was told to wait for the service elevator, which opens on the lobby level." He kept his voice even. "I wasn't wandering around. I was waiting, same as your daughter." Something shifted in Vivienne Ashworth's expression. Not an acknowledgement exactly, but a slight recalibration. "Mum," Charlotte said. She hadn't moved from her spot beside Terrence. "He was nice. I'm sure he was, sweetheart." The endearment was automatic, warm in a way the rest of her manner hadn't been. "Go stand by the desk. I'll be one moment." Charlotte moved toward the security desk with the unhurried compliance of a child who had learned not to argue in public. But she glanced back once, at Terrence, with an expression that was hard to read, something between apology and something else. Vivienne looked at him for a moment longer. "Thank you," she said. The words were correct, but they landed the way words land when someone is still deciding whether to mean them. "The security team will see you to the service elevator." She turned and walked to her daughter. Terrence watched them for just a moment. The tall woman in the tailored blazer, the small girl in the pale green cardigan, and then he picked up his tool bag and went to find the service elevator on his own. The compressor took 2 hours. It was a relay switch, a $10 part that had failed in a way that threw 3 different fault codes, which was why the facilities manager had panicked. Once Terrence got into the unit and actually looked at it, it was straightforward. He replaced the relay, reset the system, ran the diagnostics twice to be certain, and spent the last 20 minutes writing up the service report in the cramped mechanical room off the 14th floor corridor. He was on his way out, tool bag repacked, visitor badge in his hand for return at the desk, when the elevator opened on the ground floor and Charlotte was standing in it. She was alone. She had her school bag on her back and a book tucked under her arm, something with a blue cover and gold lettering, and she looked at him with the same quiet recognition as before. "Mum's still in her second meeting," she said, as though explaining. "I was going to read in the lobby." The elevator doors began to close. Terrence stepped aside to let them, and Charlotte stepped out. "Good book?" he asked. She looked at the cover. "I don't know yet. I just started it." "What's it about?" "A girl who finds a door in her grandmother's garden that goes somewhere," she considered. "I think it's going to be sad." "What makes you think that?" "The beginning is too happy," she said seriously. "When the beginning is too happy, Something bad usually happens in the middle. Terrence looked at her. That's a pretty sharp observation. My dad said that. She said it simply, without the weight that adults put on those words. He said stories that start too easy don't trust the reader. He didn't answer right away. He thought about that. He sounds like he was pretty smart. He was. She shifted the book under her arm. He fixed things too, not heating. Engines, he had a garage. Something moved in Terrence's chest, quiet, like a hand pressing gently from the inside. My wife liked engines, he said. He hadn't planned to say it. She could rebuild a carburetor faster than most people I've worked with. Charlotte looked up at him. Where is she? She died, he said. 3 years ago. Charlotte was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Do you have kids? He'd been waiting for the moment when the answer to that question became something he could give cleanly. It hadn't arrived yet. I had a daughter, he said. Her name was Maisie. She was 6. Charlotte didn't say she was sorry. She looked at him with an expression that was entirely without performance. No appropriate frown, no practiced condolence. Just a child looking at an adult who had said something true and sad. That's really hard, she said. Yeah, he said, it is. They stood there in the lobby for a moment, the two of them, and neither of them said anything else, and it didn't feel like it needed to be filled. He saw her again on a Thursday, 6 weeks later. He was back at Meridian Tower for a follow-up inspection, standard procedure after a relay replacement. Just to confirm the system was holding, he'd half expected to sign in and be escorted up and leave without incident. Instead, he came through the revolving door, and Charlotte was sitting in one of the lobby chairs near the window, reading her blue book, her school bag at her feet. She looked up immediately, the way children do when they're tuned to the specific frequency of someone they know. You're back, she said. Follow-up inspection? He said, You've been here a while? Mom had a board meeting at 3. She checked the time on a small watch on her wrist, a proper analog watch, which seemed unusual for a child her age. It usually runs late. Does she know you're down here? She knows I wait in the lobby. Charlotte marked her page with a folded corner, which Terrence noticed and didn't comment on. I finished the book, the sad one. It was sad, she confirmed, but in a good way. The door in the garden didn't go somewhere magic. It just went to the same street her grandmother grew up on, but it was enough. He sat down in the chair across from her, not because he'd planned to, but because sitting seemed like the right response to that. That sounds like a good ending, he said. It was, she said. Charlotte stopped. The grandmother said that most people spend their whole life looking for a door when the place they're looking for is already somewhere they've been. You just have to go back and see it differently. Terrence was quiet for a moment. I might need to read that book, he said. Charlotte smiled. It was the first time he'd seen her smile, and it changed her face in the way smiles change children's faces, sudden and complete, like a lamp switching on. I can lend it to you, she said. I've got the next one in my bag. He didn't see Vivienne Ashworth that visit. He signed out, nodded to the security team, and walked out of the building with Charlotte's book in his tool bag, wrapped in a grocery receipt so the cover wouldn't get scuffed. He read it that evening at the kitchen table, with the radio on low and a cup of tea he kept forgetting to drink. It took him 2 sittings. He finished it the next night. Charlotte was right. The ending was the kind of sad that felt necessary rather than cruel, the kind that left something behind instead of just taking. He thought about returning it before the next scheduled inspection. He thought about it more than was probably reasonable. He brought it back 4 days later. He told himself he was in the area. He was in the area. He had a job 3 blocks east at a fitness center on 5th Avenue whose boiler room smelled like something had died in a duct. But he went to Meridian Tower first, which was not on the way, and he knew it. Charlotte wasn't in the lobby. He stood at the desk and asked, carefully, because you had to be careful with how you asked about a child you had no formal connection to, whether Ms. Ashworth's office could pass along a returned item to her daughter. The receptionist gave him a look that he understood completely and didn't take personally, and he left the book with a short note tucked in the front cover. Finished it. You were right. It was the good kind of sad. Thanks for the loan. He signed it Terrence, 14th floor heating. 2 weeks later, a woman called the number on his service invoice. Mr. Boyle. Vivienne Ashworth's voice was different on the phone, less guarded, or perhaps just different without the visual context of the lobby and the tailored blazer. Charlotte told me she lent you a book. She did. I left it with your reception. A pause. Yes, she has it back. She also has the note you left. He waited. I want to apologize, Vivienne Ashworth said. The words came out carefully, the way words come out when still isn't entirely sure they're right. When I saw you with her in the lobby the first time. I made an assumption. It's all right, he said. It isn't, actually. Another pause. You stayed with her when no one else did, and I spoke to you the way I would speak to someone who had done something wrong, which you hadn't. A breath. Charlotte pointed this out to me, at some length. Terrence found himself almost smiling. How old is she? 8, Vivienne said, going on 45 most days. She's sharp, he said. The thing she said about beginnings being too happy, that's a real observation. A silence that felt different from the earlier ones, less taut. Her father said things like that, Vivienne said, and this time the pause after it was the kind that doesn't get filled. She stopped. He had a particular way of looking at things. She told me about him, Terrence said. The garage, did she? It wasn't quite a question. And she told me you don't like to talk about it. The silence stretched. He thought he'd said too much. He was trying to figure out how to course correct when she said, No, I don't, but she does. A quiet exhale. Which means she needs someone she can talk to who isn't me in that particular conversation. He thought of his own daughter again. He thought of the silence in his apartment that had a shape to it, a specific weight, that he'd stopped trying to describe to people because the descriptions never landed. I understand that, he said. I know you do, she said. She told me about your wife and your daughter. A pause. I'm sorry, Mr. Boyle, he said. Terrence, she said. I'm sorry. He looked out the window of his truck. The afternoon light was doing something interesting to the Bow River in the distance, flattening it out, making it look like polished tin. Thank you, he said. And he meant it. She asked him, on that same call, if he'd be willing to come to the building again. Not for a service job, but to have coffee in the lobby cafe with Charlotte, who had apparently been asking whether Terrence was going to come back. He said he'd think about it. He thought about it for about 40 seconds. He said yes. The coffee was on a Saturday morning. Charlotte arrived in the lobby with a new book under her arm. Green cover this time, and a determination to explain the entire plot of the previous book to Terrence from the beginning. Despite the fact that he'd already read it, he let her explain it. It was worth hearing her version, which involved considerably more detail about the grandmother's garden than the book itself provided. Vivienne sat across from him with a flat white and didn't say very much, which he realized after a while was not discomfort but her version of ease. She listened. She watched Charlotte with an expression that was complicated in the way expressions are complicated when they contain several things at once: love and grief and something that looked like relief. After an hour, Charlotte looked at Terrence with the directness that he was starting to understand was simply how she looked at things. Are you going to come back? She asked. Charlotte, Vivienne said, a gentle warning. It's a reasonable question, Charlotte said. To Terrence, not to her mother. He looked at her, 8 years old in a green cardigan, a different green than the first one. But he was starting to think green was just her color, with a book she'd already read twice under her arm and a watch her father probably gave her on her wrist. Yes, he said. I'll come back. She considered this with the seriousness she brought to all conclusions. Then she nodded, once, as though something had been confirmed, and went back to her book. Vivienne looked across the table at him. There was something in her expression that hadn't been there the first day in the lobby, something quieter, less defended. Not an opening exactly, more like a window, Something that let light through without requiring you to climb inside. She doesn't ask most people that, she said. I know, he said. The lobby of Meridian Tower was full of people moving in their usual directions, in and out through the revolving door, up and down in the elevators, across the marble floor to wherever they needed to be. The air smelled like coffee and floor wax and something faintly metallic, the way big buildings always do. Terrence Boyle sat with his own coffee and watched the light come through the tall glass windows and thought about what it meant that a child had picked him out of a crowded room because he smelled familiar. He thought about what it cost to lose something and still keep going. He thought about how sometimes the door in the garden doesn't go anywhere magic. It just goes to somewhere you've already been, but you look at it differently now, and that turns out to be enough. Charlotte turned a page. Vivienne looked out the window. Terrence drank his coffee. And for the first time in a long time, longer than he would have been able to say exactly, the silence between people didn't feel like something missing. It felt like something that was simply there, settled and real, the way good things sometimes are when you stop looking for the door and realize you're already standing in the garden.